Well, South Africans are on a movement known as Operation Dudula, targeting foreign undocumented residents, raiding their homes and businesses, and are asking them to leave the country. Now, protesting members of the Dudula movement have gone around houses and shops in South Africa, most prominently in the Gauteng province, to find foreign nationals without valid paperwork. Some of these protests have gone violent, with the South African police involved, leading to the arrest of some of these protesters and immigrants. There's an ongoing impasse between immigrants in South Africa and nationals who feel shortchanged with not getting enough local jobs while foreign nationals get them. The grounds, according to South Africans, is the failure of government actions as non-documented foreigners take up the majority of economic activities in the country. This high level of unemployment amongst locals and a growing anti-migrant sentiment is once again testing the resolve of South Africa's acceptance of the rest of Africa. Welcome to VSA. I'm Sulaiman. Now, these protesters say they're not xenophobes. Xenophobia, according to them, isn't what this is about. Rather, they see it as a way to restore what's theirs. Many South Africans claim to be out of jobs because undocumented foreign nationals have taken over the job space. The South African government has also, for a long time, been mum about its plans and positions on the impasse, further escalating the tension generated. The government is also proposing a law as a measure of dealing with high unemployment. This law will govern job quotas for foreign nationals in the country. The demands of these proponents of Operation Dudula and the Dudula movement is to see illegal foreign nationals leave South Africa. There have been accusations against the Dudula movement of targeting only black immigrants, a claim it has denied. Now, these foreign nationals, some of whom are documented, have been affected, and this has thrown the country in a state of violence. According to the South African media, some of the victims of this growing impasse are naturalized South Africans, others are people born in South Africa by foreign nationals. Well, joining me to look at this issue now is Matthew Parks. He's of Congress of South Africa Trade Unions and a Parliamentary coordinator from Cape Town in South Africa. And Lukhanyo Velelo, he's an analyst in Port Elizabeth. Gentlemen, thank you for your time and thanks for coming on the show. Quickly, let's start with you, Matthew. What do you make of the Dudula movement and their agitations? And there seem to be two Dudula movements.
Yes, look, I think we must condemn it. We think it's a vigilante group, and it's always a dangerous situation when any individual citizens, whatever the grievance is, seek to take the law into their hands. There can only be a recipe for violence, for criminal activities, for lawlessness, and it can get out of hand. We have had similar xenophobic violent incidences in the past, so we can't support it. But I think for us what's critical is for government to enforce the rule of law, whatever it is. So when it comes to vigilantes, they must deal with them, they must stop them in their tracks. Equally, they must ensure that they enforce all the other laws of the country so that ordinary citizens feel confident they have a government which asserts authority, which protects citizens and so forth. I think also fundamentally we have to address South Africa's economic crises, which are huge. We have a 46% unemployment rate. We've lost 2.2 million jobs during the past 2 years of COVID-19. So there's a huge sense of desperation, frustration, especially amongst young people. The unemployment rate among young people is about 75%. So that really is a ticking time bomb, and it is going to explode if you don't get a grip on it. But also, having said that, I think South Africa can't be an island of prosperity in an ocean of poverty. So it's also critical that we see how do we work with the region of Southern Africa to develop it, to address the causes of many people having to flee those countries looking for better pastures in South Africa, because you can't have South Africa growing and neighboring countries don't grow. We have to grow together, and we have to work together to resolve our current problems.
Matthew, let me stay with you before we come to Lukhanyo. And you've been able to give statistics, and you've also painted a picture talking about COVID. And it means one thing for the continent, South Africa inclusive, that the continent needs to play catch up on lost resources, lost manpower, lost time. So what's the role of the government in the current impasse? It looks like the government is slow to talking and weighing in on this. Has it been a fair response to either parties?
No, I think government has been very slow on many issues over the past decade. I think South Africa is emerging from a decade of corruption, of state capture. So we really are seeing a very weakened state. It's weak in terms of enforcing the rule of law. It's weak in terms of ensuring the delivery of basic services like water or roads or electricity. But it's also weak in terms of facilitating economic growth and reducing unemployment. So those are many things, as you're saying, we have to play catch up. We don't have the luxury of time. We can't expect pity from other countries or other continents because they're also equally facing huge challenges during COVID-19. Equally, we have to look at what needs to be done in neighboring states because no matter how much South Africa grows, we can't grow if Zimbabwe, Mozambique, if Angola, Zambia, etc. are not growing as well. It's just simply not sustainable for one part of the continent to grow and other parts of the continent to be left behind. So it requires us to be creative, to be smart. How can we collaborate? And there are possibilities. For example, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It opens huge possibilities for African countries to export to each other, to collaborate on manufacturing goods, as opposed to us simply importing cheap goods, for example, from Asia, which undermines local manufacturing jobs, which could have easily been saved or grown across the continent.
Lukhanyo, thanks. I'm excited seeing you. Thanks for your time. You're a young African just like many others. And when things like this are happening, listen to Matthew, every African, irrespective of where you are, must be concerned. So what's the vibe? What do you get out there by talking to your fellow South Africans, who, especially those who are of the movement?
Thank you very much, Matthew. To be honest with you, I haven't particularly spoken to people of this particular movement, but I have had conversations with people from other movements that are similar to them. There is a growing movement in South Africa called Put South Africa First. Again, if you've heard the name, probably mirrors something that we've seen in other countries, like in the USA with the America First. So what we're finding here is a group of young people, as already correctly identified by Matthew, a group of young people who are desperate for jobs. If you have 3/4 of the population of young people in South Africa looking for jobs but not being able to find jobs, or being desperate for jobs but have gotten to a point where they're so discouraged they're not even looking for jobs, then it's a crisis for the country. 75% is something that should have stopped the entire ministry, the entire cabinet should have been stopped in its track to resolve the issues. When you speak to young people, there's a level of desperation, there's a level of not knowing what to do. So in times like that, it's not surprising to me that these sentiments that already studies show exist already, even in good times, start flaring up to actionable violence, as we've seen now in Alexandra. If you remember, in 2008, during the financial crisis, South Africa was bleeding jobs like the rest of the world. And in South Africa, we had the biggest xenophobic attacks, which were countrywide, and a lot of people died as a result. So during this pandemic, a lot of people have also lost jobs. So it should not have come to anyone as a surprise that this is something that would happen. But I think the government needs to do something more, and it also needs to do something different than what it has done since 2008. I think also civil society needs to start thinking about addressing the sentiments, but also doing something to address the underlying issues that cause this violence.
And Lukhanyo, do you think that the populace or the people, civil society, hasn't actually done enough in sensitizing the people? Because if you look at the locals and these people who are out there on the streets, it looks like they don't have the kind of information yourself and Matthew and some others, have?
Well, from my assessment, there seems to be, well, in civil society, there's different civil society organizations in South Africa, and they're all engaging in their different mandates. There seems to be a few that address what the locals think about foreign nationals in South Africa in particular. Most of the ones that I'm aware of, it's about integrating foreign nationals in communities. It's about ensuring that they have the right documentation that they need. It's representing them when the state is giving them challenges, or state officials or civil servants. It's ensuring that they're feeling safe. It's ensuring that they're getting jobs, they're living in South Africa, basically. It's ensuring that people get their refugee status recognized by the country, and also if they're seeking refuge, to expedite the process. So I've found that those civil, as good and well-intended as they are, we need more within the civil society space in terms of addressing what the locals are experiencing when they see foreign nationals coming into their communities. And I think there is some lack there, and I think there's space for it to be addressed.
Okay, let's quickly bring in Matthew back. Matthew, you had a trade union, and probably you have a better idea of the work situation in the country. Is this a question of the capacity shown by foreign nationals or locals just being ignored?
It's a complex basket of contradictions, to be honest. There is a huge flood of migrants into South Africa from Zimbabwe with the collapse of Zimbabwe, from other parts of Africa because of the lack of economic opportunities, even from as far afield as countries in Asia, etc. And look, migration is a nature of humanity, so that you can't stop migration. You can't close your walls and just say no. But I think it's the scale of the migration, one, but also the scale of the economic crisis in South Africa. Unemployment has been increasing every single year. We're now at 46% unemployment rate. That's possibly going to go to 50%. It really is a huge thing. You can't blame Zimbabweans for fleeing Zimbabwe because the government there has mismanaged the economy to the point of collapse. It's natural. People can't live on oxygen. They'll look for better opportunities anywhere else. And so it's a nature of migrants also in any country, not just South Africa, any country in the world. Migrants will go to a country, and because of the horrendous conditions back home, they'll accept any wage, even below a minimum wage that's normally given to locals in that country, because of the desperation. That creates tension among South Africans. So South Africans will say, well, the minimum wage is 20 Rand an hour. As a migrant worker might say, well, I'm willing to accept 10 Rand an hour because of my conditions at home. So the employer will be happy to take a migrant worker and exploit them, undermine the labor laws, because it's cheaper for them. They don't care about the friction it causes between South African workers and migrant workers. They don't care about paying the migrant worker the wage they're entitled to according to the minimum wage laws of the country. The other difficulty is that many of the jobs that you find migrants normally across the world, including here in South Africa, opt for those low-skilled jobs, like a waiter in a restaurant, a gardener, a cleaner, security guards, farm workers. Again, those employers, because those are very low-profit companies, often are willing to cut corners to save profits. And of course, you have an economic recession, so it puts more pressure on those companies. But again, those are jobs, because they're low-skilled, you would have hoped it would have helped to absorb young people who don't have the skills yet to get them into the economy and get them onto their feet. So it really caused a lot of friction. And we've seen in South Africa every now and then, that friction boils out into xenophobic violence. It might start over a small issue in a particular community, and then it spreads across the country. And government has been shown to be very weak to manage those kinds of violence. And that creates tensions between South Africa, the rest of the continent. But I think also, to be fair to the South African government, some of our other countries' governments are outsourcing the problems. So Zimbabwe has to address its economic and political crisis. It cannot simply sit back on its laurels and say, well, we encourage migration to South Africa because there's less people we must sort out in Zimbabwe, because it's just a ticking time bomb. But I know that the solution is not easy. The solution would be to say, how can we help develop Zimbabwe? How can we help develop Mozambique? How can we partner? And it's very difficult when all of us...
Matthew, I'll come back sort of before we close. We'll come back to those solutions. I'm excited more that because you're here, so that you can also tell us about what COSATU is about and what it can actually do. in helping solve the situation. But quickly here, before I go back to Lukhanyo, what do you think of the protest? Historically speaking, have they worked in South Africa?
Historically, we've not had this kind of a problem. Historically, migrant labor has always been part of South Africa's social fabric. Our mining industry, for example, was built upon the migrant labor from Malawi, from Lesotho, from Botswana, Mozambique. You had one of our biggest unions, the National Union of Mine Workers. In fact, the former president was from Lesotho. We've had many trade union leaders coming from different countries. But that was always a managed situation. What we had in the last 10 years has really been, as the state capacity is frayed, as our borders have become unpatrolled, insecure, as other countries in the region have had real economic crises, it's really gotten out of hand. And unfortunately, it's gotten out of hand at the same time as our economy has been going in a downward spiral. So the two kind of things are colliding together, and they're going to erupt into violence unless we find a way to turn it around as quickly as possible. As trade unions, we try to ensure that employers abide by the labor law. The laws are clear that a migrant worker has the same rights as a South African worker, but also puts obligation on the employer to ensure that migrant workers have the work permits, their skills match the need of the job, etc. And often you don't find that happening, and again, it just adds fuel to the fire.
So, look, can you help us here? South Africa has been known to witness cases of xenophobia in the past, but these protesters this time are saying, we're not xenophobes. That's not what this is about. So what do you think really this is about?
So South Africa has a weird relationship with labeling that behavior. I could do something here that may be perceived by other people to be xenophobic, and I will not dispute the action and the behavior, but I'll dispute you labeling it as being xenophobic. We see it with racism. People will be recorded doing something that is explicitly racist, but they're not protesting that they're being recorded for doing something that's racist, but the protest being labeled as racist. So I think that's the one point. Another thing is that I think what is happening here, and I'm going to slightly differ from Matthew and Matthew's contributions. I think the problem of unemployment in South Africa, number one, is structural. We've had high unemployment in this country for decades, since the advent of democracy, almost 30 years ago. Our unemployment has always been hovering around a quarter of the labor force. So we've always been struggling to integrate at least a quarter of the labor force in this country into, or find jobs for them, or at least equip them to start businesses for themselves. So that's the first point. I don't think migration is a massive factor. I think there's other structural factors, other bigger factors, multiple of them, before we even get to the migration problem. So that's the first point of departure. The second point of departure is that even though there are these crises in the neighboring countries, I don't think we South Africans are although we receive a bulk of those, I think the numbers are a bit exaggerated. South Africans may think that the official statistics don't put the migrants in South Africa, and I'm including all migrants in South Africa, above 10% of the population. So we have about 60 million people in South Africa. They don't place them around like 6 million 6 million people. So the second point of departure is, even though we may put migration as part of the equation of trying to solve the employment question, I think if we took up all the migrants in this country and we uprooted them, we will still have a structural problem of unemployment. And I think there's another misconception that people do when they're talking about migrants, that they imagine a migrant who's downtrodden, who's probably working class, who's probably very desperate, who needs a job. But I think historically in this country, we've had a skills problem where we had to attract highly skilled people from across the continent, in fact, the rest of the world. And it wasn't so long ago, it was about 15 years ago, in the early 2000s, when we had a lot of teachers coming from neighboring countries, a lot of highly skilled civil servants who come from weakened states in neighboring countries, coming to assist the country, to build the country to where it is now. In fact, this is mirrored by the growing number of the Black middle class. It has just recently grown in the past 15 years. Before, we didn't really have a very significant Black middle class in this country. So that's the second point, that there is actually middle class people and higher class people. So when we're talking about jobs, are we also including those jobs that are highly skilled jobs? Are they taking over jobs from South Africans? How many South Africans have post-matric or post-high school or post-secondary education in this country? So those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we say the problem is just an economic one. I think for me, the problem.
Well, apologies. Lukhanyo, looks like we lost the connection to you there. I'm hoping that you get back. Let's quickly get to Matthew, and we'll start talking about some of the solutions as we wind down. The government is creating a job quota for foreign nationals. Perhaps, do you think that can actually help the current, challenge that the country is dealing with? Well, it looks
we are
like
taking non-white foreign nationals.
Okay, Lukhanyo, sorry, I lost you for a bit. Just as I was going to Matthew, I lost Matthew. Now you're back. Good again. You're both back. I don't know what's happened, but again, I'm happy that you're both back. So, Lukhanyo, let's finish with you before we go to Matthew. I was actually throwing a question at Matthew, but let's listen to you before we get to Matthew. Now we're winding down. You've been able to tell us where you differ in your analysis on this particular issue, which is very, very important to Africans. Have you been able to think of some way out of it? Because this doesn't really look good. Now you talked about education. It looks like some categories of South Africans deliberately don't want to, go to school. And if ultimately they can't find a job, that anger is, vented on non-South Africans as a cause for their joblessness. Lukhanyo.
I think where I was leading towards is that this is an issue of state failure. The South African state has failed the South Africans, and Matthew has alluded to this. There has been a lot of funds that have been siphoned from the state by politicians. And so you find that there's problems in schools. So South Africans may not be deliberately, at least the overwhelming majority of them from what we find in studies, dropping out of school or not pursuing post-secondary education qualifications. It's because they don't have resources. We had Fees Must Fall not so long ago. It was about how many years? 2015. So that was about 7 years ago. Because students could not afford to pay for fees. And that, again, is the failure of the state to fund public education in this country. It's also the failure of the state to ensure that people have the right skills that are needed by the South African economy. And I think the way our education system is structured is failing to ensure that young people leave the secondary education with skills that are needed by the economy in South Africa. And you also see it in some of the excuses that people use to target migrants. For example, they will say they are using state resources that they're not paying taxes for, like going to hospitals, going to clinics, et cetera, et cetera. Again, how many hospitals have the ANC built in the past 10 years? And is that mirroring the population growth in this country? So
there's a question. I don't mean to button. Apologies for buttoning because I'm trying to play catch up here. But these are concerns that the government should also look into. Let's quickly bring in Matthew here so that we can wrap up. By the way, it's International Women's Day, so I got the ladies waiting on us, so we don't eat up their time. So Matthew, quickly here, solutions now. How can we get out of this? And let us in quickly, if you can pack this together, what COSATU is also doing to help the situation at the moment.
Sure. Look, I think number one is South Africans. We have to fix South Africa. So COSATU has been engaging with the government and with our colleagues in business. We've developed an economic recovery plan which looks at how do we grow the economy, from ensuring we have reliable and affordable electricity to ensuring that we fix our trains, which are critical to our mining, our agricultural, manufacturing exports. They're critical to getting workers to work on time. We have to fix corruption. We have to fix a very weak state. We have to look at how to mobilize financial stimulus to grow the economy, to give support to SMEs. And as Lukhanyo said, we have to fix an education system which currently sees half of the children entering grade 1 not matriculating grade 12. So there's many issues we have to fix as a country. But having said that, South Africa is a medium-sized country. even in Africa. So it requires similar interventions by our colleagues in neighboring states, be it government, be it business, be it trade unions, civil society. So we have to look at also what supporting role can we play in South Africa to the development of Mozambique, of Zimbabwe, of Zambia, of the DRC, etc. It requires those countries' governments also to actually play a role and to do better by their citizens. But also there is a need for other countries across the world too, like Bangladesh, also to play their role. They shouldn't be simply seeking to outsource their problems to neighboring states. So these are complex issues. I don't think there are any easy solutions, and they are frustrating because if you look at even other countries like the United States, it's grappling with the same issues. Brazil, Europe, across the world. I mean, even Nigeria has got the same issues. I don't think that there's a single country in the world which hasn't got these very same issues. But again, it speaks to Sulaiman, to all of us working together to say, how can we collaborate as South Africa and Nigeria? Can we promote trade together? That can help create jobs. Can we invest in education opportunities? Can we integrate our railway network to boost trade amongst African countries, as opposed to us simply buying our clothes from China, for example? So it requires a lot of smart and hard work, but the alternative is much worse. I think it's better for us to do the hard work than to give up and to fold our arms.
Well, I think it's a conversation that we really must stay on, as highlighted by you both. We must stay on this and ensure that we keep talking to ourselves and see how we can develop every city, every country, and ultimately get the continent going. Many thanks. Speaking with us, Matthew Parks, who is the Congress of South Africa Trade Unions and Parliamentary Coordinator from Cape Town in South Africa, and Lukhanyo Velelo, a beautiful analyst there from Port Elizabeth. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, and we hope to see you again here on The Square.
Thanks.
Well, coming up on VSA, it's International Women's Day, and quite a lot is happening, and the women have been patient enough to tell us more about how we can break the bias. Stay with us. Well, the official website of the International Women's Day says whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. Knowing that bias exists isn't enough. Action is needed to level the playing field. Put simply, breaking the bias means to start questioning the attitudes we hold and shine a light on them. Now, bias at the workplace has changed in recent times, but is still seen to hold messages that are very disturbing. The choices women make have long been subjected to many things around them. In different establishments, women have been held back for issues such as marriage and childbirth, and Africa as a continent is still fighting to give opportunities to its women. In Africa today, only one president is female. In South Africa, only 13% of its parliamentarians are women. In Nigeria, there are less than 30 women in 469 legislators. Now, while there is a gradual change, there is still little in comparison with the potential of the women folk. the empowerment of women and support given to women have become extremely important, especially as their population increases. Education has become vital, and providing equal opportunities more than ever essential. Now, joining me to talk on these, I have with me Ndoni Mcunu. She's a climate scientist and social preneur from Johannesburg in South Africa. And of course, Irene Ogaja. She's a peace and security expert in Nairobi, Kenya. Ladies, good to see you, and once again, happy International Women's Day. And truly, the conversation should go beyond the day. Looks like Africa is gradually getting, more and more out there, and some other menfolk are also, putting their weight behind this cause. Now, how important is the day? Let's start with you, Irene. How important is the International Women's Day to some of the key objectives of what the continent or the world is trying to push?
Thank you so much, Sulaiman, for having me on the show. And happy International Women's Day to all the women in the continent and globally as well. International Women's Day is an important day to showcase the power and the potential of women and girls in the society and globally. It measures the trends, how far women have come in various aspects of society, of various matrices, including economically, decision-making in terms of power, their place in the power positioning, as well as in health issues and other societal issues. We also look at International Women's Day as a day to be able to celebrate women and their role in society. Women are more than 50% of the society, but are underrepresented in almost every aspect of the world. And today, we look at every aspect that women are involved in, and we look at how far we have come over the last 100 years since we started celebrating International Women's Day. And we also see mitigation measures in which we can be able to ensure that we can be able to achieve gender equality as soon as possible. Well, as we are moving right now, we are looking at 137 years until women can be able to achieve gender equality. But we want gender equality to be achieved now so that we can be able to improve our society. Women are solution multipliers, so we need to put them on the decision-making table. We need them to be able to participate in every aspect of the society. The statistics are still quite dire. If you look at the number of CEOs in the world, and this includes the developed world, we have less than 20% representation of women. We have less than 30% of women in managerial positions globally. So if we have combined these numbers, including in the international sphere, what is the situation in Africa? You have already said it's only one woman in Africa who's a president, and she happened to get there because of an unfortunate circumstance that happened, that the former president died, and it's here in East Africa. So we still have to change the perception with which women and the biases in which women are seen and viewed so that we can break this glass ceiling and have representation of women in all spheres of society. Apart from that, women are actually victims of very many negative things that happen in the world. Apart from peace and security, which is actually a critical aspect, you can see the situation in Myanmar, the situation in Ukraine. Women and girls are the most affected. Gender-based violence is actually right now about 137 women daily and internationally, that is, are killed by either their partners or their family members. Those are not good numbers. Basically, it's almost one woman in every country is killed every day. And these statistics vary. Apart from peace and security, this year we're looking at women in the aspect of environment and climate, and how this has affected women and how it has affected their push towards gender equality.
Let me bring in Ndoni here. Sorry to butt in, apologies. Let me bring in Ndoni here. Listening to you, I think some of the key things that we should bring before you, Ndoni, is politically and in leadership. Listening to Irene, there's still a cold treatment given to women. And she's just reminded us that it's likely to take over a century for the continent to get to where it intends to get to. So how do you think the continent or women can help deal with this, going by the theme of this year's, which is breaking the bias?
I think women have immense experience, especially if we're speaking about the climate. If we're going into rural areas and we see who are the people that are working on the ground, it is actually women. And yet we still have major challenges in terms of giving women rights to land and land ownership. So women play a very big role from the experience to their personal journey as women. They come in with diverse opinions, diverse skills, as well as different ways in which we can come up with solutions, just like climate change, food security, as well as leadership and politics.
All right, okay, you know, some people will say if you're not giving, still with you, Ndoni, let me stay with you for a bit. If you're not giving, you ask for it, which is what Nigerian women did just recently with the constitutional amendment where some of the bills were thrown out and they marched towards the National Assembly, and now the National Assembly has to revisit those bills, 5 rejected bills. So as women, how important is it to constantly make these demands?
It's very important. Unfortunately for us as women, even I can speak from the science perspective, the lack of representation is not necessarily something that's very good for the upcoming generation, for International Women's Day, for skills upliftment and experts upliftment. And so the need for women to actually take that upon themselves. And I always say that taking it upon themselves means that they themselves, we ourselves need to actively today think about, as it is International Women's Day, who are we mentoring? If you need mentorship, are we actually sorting and trying to find out how can we get mentored? How can we be better in our careers, or rather better represented in our industry, as well as more visible in our industries? So it's really up to us to do that. And the thing that makes that important is that it's our voices and it's our narrative that needs to be heard. And so as long as we are the ones that are not taking the forefront in this, we're always going to find ourselves in a situation where we are being misquoted, or we're frustrated about days like this because they're not doing anything. But we need to actually start to say, on International Women's Day, this is what we want to see. We want to see young girls being mentored. We want to see issues around job creation and women development and leaders being discussed, as well as actual assignments of women into these kind of positions. And
Irene, the role of education can be undermined, and the more African women that are educated, the better. And perhaps, who knows, that can actually work the magic before the century mark you highlighted. So how can respective governments help improve the child's education?
Well, that's a good question. It is critical. A lot of young women are married early. That's one of the things that we've seen. Another thing in our communities, it is usually the usual modus operandi is that when there is issues with the economic status of the family, the boy is educated, the girl is led to stay in the home. And this narrative has to change. This perception and bias has to change. This has to go all the way to the grassroots. The local community leaders need to educate their people in terms of empowering the woman, because when a woman is educated, the home, as I said, a woman is a solution multiplier. The home becomes much better. The children are better educated, and the economic empowerment of the home is much better. And you can see that there's way more advancement in the home. And when you build the home, you build the community, you build the society, and you can look at a global society that is well more empowered. Aside from that, it is critical to ensure to push as far as possible the level of education of a woman. Whereas maybe women leave school at 12 years, we can try and push it to 16 years so that they have more knowledge, more empowerment, and more exposure, so that we can increase the level of education. And also proper legislation is critical to ensure that at least education is not only biased towards men, but also includes women.
And Irene, before we go back to Ndoni, you know, when you spoke about education, I'm trying to actually string it along some form of awareness. In the past, I've spoken about issues like female genital mutilation on the show here, but in some cultures, women are still the drivers of these practices that people like yourselves are trying to say, hey, stop. How can they be reached to make better decisions?
Female genital mutilation, I must say, is actually a practice that is diminishing right now, but hundreds of millions of women have actually been through the process of female circumcision. And this practice is a very culturally entrenched practice that has survived over years and over centuries. It is diminishing right now. It is reducing in most places, but it's still being practiced. Now, one of the things that you look at the non-governmental organizations, the CSOs and CBOs that are all the way to the ground, working with not only the society and the community. These are the people who can be able to reach out and help these communities unlearn these habits. It's a process. Culture is very deeply ingrained in us as individuals and us as a society. So that these are habits, and these are cultural habits that need to be learned. And a lot of reallocation of resources needs to be done towards ensuring that, and percolates all the way to the community level actually, to ensure that female genital mutilation is something that is prevented, to provide homes in which women who are facing this can be able to go and be protected. Because some of the times they are forced by their parents, they are forced by their fathers, it's part of their cultural practices, so it is hard to escape. So this reallocation of resources and change of policies that actually banned female genital mutilations is critical, not only at the national government level, but also at the community level.
Ndoni, you know, listening to you, both of you, tells, you know, that there is a need for more women in government or public offices, for better decisions to be taken, especially as it concerns women and our society. But the thing here is that how can this, you know, be achieved?
Yeah, I think there needs to be more systems where we are actively wanting to discuss to women. We actively want to have conversations around why are we not in the system? Why are we not getting the kind of jobs that we need to do? And I think this is going to take a whole community. It has to be, as Irene is saying, from high school level, primary school level, straight up, you know, how women are being taught to think and how they're taught to view themselves needs to be an active engagement and a change. And it can't be a quick solution or a solution where it's based on one day. It's a solution that is based from, you know, as a priority going up, meaning it should be a major goal in our education system, as well as in our own personal family upbringing lifestyles, and making sure that we dismantle cultural norms and cultural limitations that we have. And so we need to actually actively say, yes, we've identified the problem, that there's a need for a change, but now what do we need to do? And it mustn't be a conversation that's happening at a very high level where it's not trickling down to the people in the communities and rural areas and to schools, but it needs to be a conversation that's being taken from the bottom up, where we're asking you know, the rural areas, the schools, the communities around these cultural challenges that we have and these cultural norms and how we view, and then how we develop not just the woman or the girl child, but also developing the leaders that are making these decisions.
Now let's see how we can drive this home as we wrap up. I'll come back to you, Irene. How can this narrative, change or be given more wings to fly? Because it excites anyone to be a part of the gains of what women are fighting for at the moment. So let's say we're trying to get this done in the next few years. What are those key things you expect to see in our world today, starting from our continent, Africa?
Well, Sulaiman, critical is the sharing of information that we need to share the gains that we have made, not only at the global level, but also all the way to the bottom level. Now, we really push, and at the international level, at the global platforms, and we have these discussions and roundtable discussions about the role of women and the strides we've made towards gender equality. But what does the woman in the village know this? So the push towards ensuring that this information reaches the most critical level, which is at the individual level, at the societal level, at the community level, is important. Now, the push also towards reallocating resources to put in policies that are geared towards empowering women and girls is also a critical measure that can be put in place. And of course, I believe, and I sincerely believe, education is the most important and most empowering measure that can be put for each individual girl to ensure that they maximize in terms of what education they can get, and also the opportunities that they can get out there expand for the girl child when they are educated.
Ndoni, I hope, have you been able to, have some form of conversation with especially policymakers who, government officials who are, men, because some still think that this whole, talk about inclusion, about, equality is a battle of the sex. So what do you say to people, up there who are already, making laws that can also help, ensure that the process is achieved in record time?
I think the biggest challenge that we have with policies is that they are on the ground, they are written there, and they are saying everything that sounds very perfect. We want to empower women, we want the girl child to be supported. But the girl child doesn't even know that there's a policy for them out there. So policymakers need to understand that a policy is not supposed to only just be at a high level, but it needs to be something that people are understanding. What does it mean? How do we interpret this in our own lives? And so for me, the people that are leaders and they want to make a change, make sure that these policies that we are trying to, that are written are fully understood by people. This can be done through, making sure that we have proper engagements with communities, having apps that are allowing information around empowering women and how they can actually have access to these policies and what does it mean for them. It's important that policy is not sitting only in our libraries, but it's also being communicated to our communities. And while we're communicating that, be aware of what is the participation towards this policy, and not just at the end when we've done our policy, but at the beginning to make sure that the policy that's being designed is not at a high level, very well written English level conversation, but it's actually supposed to be at a level of implementation from the bottom up.
Well, I sincerely hope that this conversation can go on talking about young boys. They also should be included in some of these key conversations you all are having, so that from that, from the cradle, we can start having people who have the proper idea of what you just shared with us on the program, and start seeing the girl child as equals and, not of a lower being, as we've seen. Because I think it was Irene, who painted a picture of some families in Africa who would rather want the boy child to continue with his education and ask the girl child to stand down. Ladies, thank you for your time. I'm all excited. I'm hoping that this conversation can continue, go beyond the International Women's Day. So thank you for being such nice company, Ndoni, Mcunu, and Irene Ogaja. And of course, thanks to everyone on the continent for watching. Happy International Women's Day.